Of course, in Victoria, Premier Daniel Andrews, once he gets back to work after his spinal problems, will be keen to take advantage of his Belt and Road deal with Beijing to start repairing Victoria's broken and debt-laden economy. But before he brings in the Chinese construction teams, his government has been forced to hand over details of their deal with China to the Commonwealth, hand over documents that he has refused to explain to his own people. Off the back of the introduction of the Foreign Veto Laws, the process has begun to determine whether such deals with China should be torn up. Now, in light of how appallingly and illegally China is treating many of our export industries, Daniel Andrews might not be so confident of what he signed back in 2017. So to shed some light on where this is heading, I caught up earlier today with Michael Shoebridge, foreign policy expert at the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. Michael, there's no way out of this for the Andrews government, is there? They have to cough up all the documents and all the details to that federal government body.
Yes, they do. But the strange thing about this is why the Victorian government can't disclose these agreements to the Victorian and broader Australian public. What is the secrecy? And if part of this deal that they've reached with the Chinese central government authorities is to hold the information back from the public, then what on earth were they thinking making those commitments? So as you say, the good news is the federal government's got the power to get this information disclosed, but it shouldn't be a matter of federal power being necessary. The Victorian government should publicly disclose agreements like this that it's reaching.
Because 12 months ago, Dan Andrews was quite public about the fact that he thought that a deal like this should go ahead because it means jobs, it means projects, infrastructure for Victoria. But he's always been short on details. And I think that's a frustrating thing, and it creates the suspicion, doesn't it?
It does. And the documents that have been released, like the BRI framework document, there's always been an arm wrestle with the Victorian government to get them released. He only released some of the documentation during the last Victorian state election when he was under pressure to do so. And when the documents are released, you can see why he didn't want them out in public, because they've clearly been written by the Chinese side, not by the Victorian government. They're an embarrassing example of a state government signing up to boilerplate Chinese Communist Party language.
So, apart from the language, what do we as Australians have to fear, do you think, with deals such as this, Belt and Road deals with China between our states and maybe even some of our territories? What's the big danger?
Well, I think we've got to understand Beijing's larger purpose with these deals. They're part of China's economic strategy, which Xi Jinping articulated at some length during these two sessions of the peak sham Chinese political bodies, the National People's Congress and Consultative Committee meeting that has just happened. He outlined the dual circulation economic strategy, China's plan to make its economy less dependent on others' economies and others' economies more dependent on China's. That will give Beijing more economic leverage over other economies. These Belt and Road arrangements and the public-private partnerships that the Victorian government is so keen on will hand Beijing more economic leverage over Australia if they are implemented.
I guess the Andrews government has to jump through two hoops here. Not only do they have to get through the Foreign Veto Laws and the investigation into their deal, but I guess security agencies can then turn around anyway and say we're not comfortable with how close China is getting to Victoria.
Well, yes, but, you know, the sensible thing here for the Victorian government is to realise that their assumptions about Victoria's economic and political relationship with China are now broken. You cannot get past the naked economic coercion that Beijing is inflicting on Australia. So they need to explain to themselves and their public why these deals keep making sense. And if they want to say they're deliberately splitting with the federal government and Parliament's position on China, well, that's a time to use the legislative power that the Commonwealth has. And then the detail of these arrangements, the idea that big Chinese construction firms are going to get involved in building critical infrastructure in Victoria is simply bad policy. They will bring Chinese digital technology with it, and they will bring all the encumbrances that their close connections to the Chinese state bring. It's hard to see it making sense on any level.
So we knock it all on the head. The 2017 deal is done and dusted. We can it. Given that, I worry, though, that our relationship with China only deteriorates further.
Well, I think that in a very strange way, Australia has been fortunate to have Beijing show that it will use economics and trade as weapons against Australia at a time when the pandemic has interrupted some of that key trade, foreign students being a big example. We're demonstrating that our companies and institutions can diversify their markets, and we're understanding that the sheer business risk of getting closer and closer into the China market is a mistake. So think about having this kind of national debate before the pandemic, when Chinese students were still flying in huge numbers into Australia. And think about having it before China ended the wine trade, the lobster trade, the wheat trade, the barley trade, the coal trade. So I think we've woken up, and it's better to wake up early than late.
Yeah, it's been one of the great lessons of the pandemic. Michael Shoebridge, thank you very much for your time.